The bMesh Blender Python module allows us to work with edges, verts, and faces. It also allows us to work with something called loops. Now, if you've been working with Blender for a while, you know that edge loops, face loops, and loop cuts exist. But bMesh loops don't exactly map to your mental model of what loops are in Blender. Now, in this video, we're going to go over what bMesh loops are, how to use them, how to select an edge loop using bMesh loops, how to work with UVs, and vertex colors. Let's get started. Okay, let's take a look at Blender's documentation, and in particular the bMesh documentation. If we scroll down to the part where it says loops, we can see what loops consist of, and they consist of a single edge, a single vert, and a reference to a face, and that's it. Now notice down below it says loops store per vertex data. We're going to be coming back to that later in the video. To make sense of that text, let's take a look at this diagram. It has a single face, 4 verts, and 4 edges. And notice where it says loop, let's see, this face has 4 loops. Now, if we add one more face to this diagram, you can see that this other face has its own set of loops. Notice that even though we have these 2 vertices and the same edge that belong to both of these faces, they have their own set of loops. Also notice that these loops have a particular direction. They're going counterclockwise. We'll be using this in our scripts later on. Okay, let's hop on over to Blender and take a closer look through the interactive Python console at these loops. I have this basic scene with a plane in it, and I've moved the 3D viewport just a bit and added this interactive Python console. Now I'm going to go ahead and import bMesh. I'll get a reference to the currently active object like that. Then I'll create a bMesh and fill it in with the data from our currently active object. That's the bMesh, and let's fill in the bMesh with the data from our object like that. Now let's make sure that we can use indices to reference the single face of this particular plane like that by ensuring the lookup table. Now I can check how many faces this plane has, and you can see that there is only a single face, of course, in this plane. Now if we go one step deeper, we can look at the loops, and you can see that we have 4 loops right here. I'm going to go ahead and select the very first one. And if we expand this just a bit, you can see that we've printed out what the bMesh consists of, and it has an index, it has a vert, it has an edge right here, and a face. So that is it, right? As mentioned in the documentation, it only contains 1 edge, 1 vert, and a reference to the face. Now I have a quick pop quiz for you. Let's add a single vert right here. So I'm going to hit E to extrude this vert, and that's it. With this change, how many loops do you think this mesh has? Now, if you answered 4, you are correct. That's because even though we added a new edge and a new vert, there is no face, so that means that we don't have more loops. Now, if I would select these verts and then hit F to fill in that face, and now we've added some loops. How many loops does this mesh have? Now, if you answered 7, you are correct. Now let's take a look and draw where they are. So we have the loops that go like this, right? For this face. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the other face. That's 5, 6, and then 7. All right, enough theory, let's do some practical things. Now, for the first practical exercise, I want to implement the edge loop selection that you usually do by holding Alt and then clicking on the edge in edit mode and selecting the whole edge that goes around the mesh. Now, we're going to be implementing this using the bMesh loops, and let's go ahead and dive into the scripting workspace in Blender and start implementing it. Now, to bootstrap this example, I have some code already ready for us, and I'm first importing BPY and bMesh at the very top. Pretty straightforward. I have a main function which is going to contain all our functionality. I'm getting the currently active object, and since our object is going to be in edit mode, I'm using from edit mesh so we can get the edit mesh data, creating that bMesh object. Now, since we're going to be selecting, I want to make sure to get the selected edge that we've selected by hand. So this right here, using some list comprehension, we're going through all the edges in our bMesh, and if that is selected, we're creating this list right here. Now, if nothing's selected, we're just gonna quit out and return. And if there is something selected, we're gonna select the very first edge. Now, this is gonna be the starting edge of our selection. From our starting edge, we can take the link loop, so the loops that this particular edge is part of, and I'm just going to get the reference to that loop right here. Now we're going to be adding our code right here, and later down the line we're just updating the edit mesh and freeing up the bMesh as we always do. Okay, let's start filling out this code. And the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to get the next loop based on our current loop. So we're going to use this, and we're going to get the next linked loop, and we're going to use link loop next let's assign this to a variable so we can use it. So I've created a next loop variable that has a reference to the next loop. And using this reference, let's get the edge that this loop is associated with and select it. And we're using the edge property and then select and setting that to true, so making that edge selected. Now let's go ahead and zoom in right here so you can take a closer look. And let's go ahead and run this code. But before I do that, which edge right here do you think we're going to be selecting? Now think about that and hold your answer. I'm going to run this code. And here is the answer. We're selecting this edge right here. Remember, we're going around right here around this face. So the next loop, so this right here, link loop next, is pointing at this particular loop. Now at this point, you're wondering, wait a minute, Victor, like, how is this going to help us select around the whole mesh? You'll see in just a minute. Now, the next thing that we need to do is we need to transfer somehow from these loops into another face, so the loops of another face. And to do that, we're going to be using the next radial loop. Let's add that code right here. So we're going to be using the reference to our next loop and then getting the link loop radial next, so the next radial loop. And this is going to be, I'm going to just call it our neighbor loop, since this is going to be the neighboring loop on the other side of the edge. Now I'm going to go ahead and select that edge using the reference to the neighbor edge. Now let me select this edge one more time. Now it's going to be selecting the same edge right here because we're going to be selecting it from the other side of the edge. Let's go ahead and run that. And you can see we still are selecting this particular loop, but we have actually transferred to another face. And this particular face is what we're looking at right here with this neighbor loop. Okay, now that we're on the other side of this edge, we need to select the next linked loop. And we're using this reference right here and getting the next linked loop. So exactly what we're doing here, but we're doing it on our neighbor. And I'm assigning the next neighbor loop. And let me go ahead and select that particular edge. Let me just select that single edge right here and go ahead and rerun our script. And now you can see that we have selected the next edge in the edge loop that we're trying to select. Now, before we move on, let's quickly recap what exactly each line does. And I'm going to go ahead and do some drawing right here. Go ahead and try to get as close as I can. So like that. So I'm looking at the original edge right here. And let's go ahead and start marking that up with some colors. Now this first edge that I'm selecting is this right here, and this variable right here represents that loop. Now after we got that loop, we're going to get the link loop next, so this next loop. And remember that the next loop, we're going in this direction right here, and that is that next loop. Now we need to transfer to the other face, so this face right here, and we're going to be using this link loop radial next. So we're kind of transitioning. Let me actually draw this. So we're going to be doing something like this, right? And this particular operation is going to be the link loop radial next, and it's going to give us another loop on this side going the other direction. Remember, I was saying that everything's going counterclockwise. Now this is exactly how it's moving, right? So the neighbor loop right here is represented with this color. Now, the next thing after that, we're just going to get the link loop next. So the next thing right here, so going in that direction, and that is exactly the loop that we're looking for originally. So that is the next neighbor loop, and then we get the edge and then select it, right? And I hope this makes more sense as we just draw it on the screen and just show what exactly each one of these variables mean. Okay, now that we understand how this is going to work, we now have to just repeat this over and over again. So we're just going to be going like this all the way around our mesh, right? So let's extract this code into a function. I'm going to cut that and paste it up here and create a new function for us to reuse. So I'm going to call this function get next neighbor loop. I'm going to pass in a loop and I'm going to return the next neighbor loop. I'm going to go ahead and call it right here. And I'm going to get that variable like that. Let's go ahead and make sure that this still works. I'm going to select that first edge and run our script. And you can see that this next loop was selected. Awesome. So this code still works. And now I'm just going to be repeating this code over and over again until we get to the starting edge, right? So we're going to loop all the way around the mesh. And we're just going to be checking that this next neighbor loop is not the starting edge. And I have represented the code that's going to be repeated with this loop I'm going to be looking at the current edge and making sure that it is not equal to the starting edge, the edge that we've started with, the selection has started with. And I'm just going to go ahead and repeat this over and over again until we reach that starting edge. Let me go ahead and select that. And let's run our script, and look at that. We have selected all the way around that mesh. All right, now this will work if we select this other edge that's going in this direction. Let's go ahead and run that, and you can see that we're going all the way around that mesh as well. All right, and if you're learning something new and enjoying this tutorial, make sure to hit the like button. I'll greatly appreciate it. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about how you can get access to the UV data of a given mesh. Now, I have a simple scene right here with a cube. I have applied a texture to it, and you can see it's all messed up. I have this particular image right here, and I want to use bmesh loops to programmatically set the correct coordinates. Now, I have a basic script right here that I've already set up for us so we can get started right away. I'm importing BPY and bmesh. I have a main function right here. I'm getting a reference to that active object, getting that bmesh filled out with the mesh data right here. And here is where that new interesting part starts. We're accessing the layers, and then in particular the UV layer. We're going to get a reference to that, and next we're just going to be looping over all the faces of our bmesh, only working on the faces that are currently selected. We're going to be printing out that current index, and we're going to go into each face, and we're going to loop over the loops, or iterate over the loops. We're going to print out the loop index right here, so we're accessing loop index, and then we're going to print out the UV coordinates by using the loop, applying the active layer, and then using UV to print that out. So this is going to be like a vector, a 2D vector. Let's go ahead and run this script, and I'm going to go ahead and open System Console, and you can take a closer look right here. We're printing out the face index, we're printing out the loop, we're printing out the UV coordinates for each one of these loops. All right, let's get started and work with one face at a time and see how it goes. I'm going to go ahead and select this first face, and let me run the script again to get the indexes of the loops that we're going to be working with. Now, this last thing that was printed right here is that top face. So it's face with an index of 5. It has a loop of index of 20, 21, 22, 23. And let's go ahead and update the UV coordinates of the 20th loop. And I'm using this if statement right here. If the index of a given loop is equal to 20, we're going to take that UV layer, get that UV data, and in particular, we're going to get the Y, and then set that to 0. Right now, look at the current way that the UV coordinates are set up in this particular face that we have selected. You can see they're right in the middle. Let's go ahead and run the script and watch what happens. Now, as soon as I ran the script, it moved this UV coordinate right here, right to the very bottom. So this is 0. Remember, this is 0 and the top is 1. And we've set the loop with the index 0 and set that UV coordinate on the Y to 0 right here. Now, this next one, I believe, is 21. So the loop with index 21, I'm going to go ahead and update this if statement to also include that loop. And I'm going to just add a or, so either that or this. And I'm going to set that to 21. Let's go ahead and run the script. And look at that, that also updated the coordinate of that other loop. Okay, let's go ahead and update the coordinates of the other two loops that were left. Now it's 22 and 23, so I'm just gonna copy that. And I'm gonna set the Y coordinate of that to 1, so just push them up to, and let me go ahead and run this. And you can see now we have modified the Y coordinates for all the loops in our selected face. Okay, we've modified the Y coordinate for all our loops. Let's update X coordinate. And we're gonna go ahead and start with loop with the index of 20. And if you remember, it was this one right here. Now, we need to move the one that's on the top of that, right? So if you remember that this was 20, this was 21. So we're going counterclockwise right here. So this is 22 and this is 23. Let's go ahead and move these two. So this is 20 and 23 to the very end right here. So this is 0 and 0, right? Let's go ahead and do that now right here. So I'm using index 20 and then index 23 and setting, again, getting the UV layer, getting the UV data, X, and then setting that to 0. Let's go ahead and run the script. And you can see that we have pushed these two UV coordinates all the way right here. Now we have all these rounded squares mapped to this top face. Okay, let's go ahead and update the other part. So we're going to be updating 21 and 22, and we need to move it right here. Now, what is the right way to calculate that coordinate? Now, we have 6 of these rounded squares, and this right here at the very end is 1, right? So we would need to divide 1 by 6, and so each one of these right here is just going to be like 1/6, right? So let's go ahead and set that as our coordinate for the other 2 loops. And again, I'm just using the index 21 and 22, and then dividing 1 by 6 and setting that x coordinate to exactly that value. Let's go ahead and update and run our script. And look at that. You can see also in the 3D viewport, you can see that the face is now correctly mapped. And of course, the same thing goes with the image in the editor. And we have done all this with only a Python script. Okay, this code works for the top face. Will this actually work for the other faces? Let's go ahead and just select this side face right here. And let's go ahead and run the script. And you can see that nothing happened. Now, why did this not work? Well, it's pretty simple. If we take a look into our terminal, you can see that we have the face that is currently selected with the index of 1, but now we have our loops with index 4, 5, 6, and then 7. Now, if you look at our code, we have hard-coded the indices 20, 21, 22, and 23. And you can see that this won't really work out if we just keep hard-coding these values. Of course, we can just go ahead and copy paste this over and over again for face, updating this particular index and that particular index over and over again. Now, it's possible and it would work, but I wouldn't recommend it because it's going to be a pain in the butt to maintain. Now, we can use a bit of math how to not have to repeat the code over and over again. Now, something that we can do is we can use something called modulo. Now, I'm going to go ahead and open the interactive Python console, and I'm going to go ahead and show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to use the modulo operator, and I'm going to divide 20 by 4 using the modulo, and you can see the result of that is 0. Now, this is basically the remainder. Now, if we divide 20 by 4, we get 5, and that's pretty straightforward. So that's like the remainder of that division. Now, what if we divide, for example, 21? That's going to give us 525, and if we use modulo operator, we're going to get 1. So what does that even mean? So if we multiply, so we're going to take 5 that we got here without the decimal point, and then we're going to add 1 to the modulo result right here, we're going to get 21, right? So when we divide, so basically the modulo is getting that remainder, and this is what we're going to be using to get the correct index. Now, this might be a bit challenging to understand. I have a whole separate video where I try to explain this with another example. I'll link it in the description for you to check out as well. And if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed with this particular part, don't worry, this is not very simple. You just need to use this a number of times to get some practice runs in so you can understand it better. So if we take a look again at our face, so face with the index of 1, you can see that this first loop is with an index of 4, and the first loop with that top face was 20, right? So 4 modulo 4, we get 0, right? And let's go ahead and select, let's say, the side face. Let's run our script. Let's take a closer look what that gave us, and you can see the face has an index of 2, first loop with the index of 8. Let me go ahead and do again 8 modulo 4. Again, we get 0. So you can kind of see the picture of like if we do a particular operation on the index, you can see we're using this modulo operator and using that on the index of our loop, we are going to get the same result, and we can use that property to rewrite our code and use that. Let me go ahead and rewrite the very first if statement using the modulo operator. So I'm going to rewrite this right here. I'm going to comment this out. And as you see me do in the interactive Python console, so the index modulo 4, when it equals to 0, we're going to set the UV-Y coordinate to 0. The same thing goes if the result is 1. And you check this in the interactive Python console, and I highly recommend you do this if you're not really comfortable. You'll get 1 for 21 and the other loops that correspond to that. So let's take a look. So 21 is the second loop that we print out usually. So for face 1, you should try it with 5. And for face with the index of 2, you should try that with 1. And you should get, you guessed it, 1 as the result. Now let's go ahead and select that, run our script, and you can see right away that this did something. It updated this part right here for this face. Let's select another face, take a closer look again. at these two bottom UV coordinates, and let's run that script. And you can see it updated that as well. Let's go ahead and rewrite the second loop in a similar way. And I'm using, again, the module here, using if the module equals 2 and right here 3, and set y coordinate of those UV coordinates to 1. Let's go ahead and run the script. And you can see that this is updating the top coordinates for any face that we select. Now, let me go ahead and rewrite the rest of this script using the modulo operator. Okay, you can see that I've written the rest of the script again using that modulo operator. And now let's run our script. And you can see that as soon as I select a particular face, run our script, it all maps to the very first square with the rounded edges, right? So now this basically working out well. Let me go ahead and clean up the script by removing this commented code. Okay, for the final thing here, we need to figure out how to make sure to map each one of these individual squares with the rounded corners to each one of these faces. And the trick here is we need to figure out how to update the x coordinate for each one of these faces in a way that's gonna distribute each one of these rounded squares to a face. Now, we can use the fact that we have 6 faces that we're working with, and each face has an index. It goes from 0 to 5, and we can use that in our calculation. So we can use the face index to get the right x coordinates for each face. So if we take a look that each time we shift to the next square, we need to add 1/6, right? So each time we shift, we add 1/6. And basically that's multiplication. We're gonna be adding 1/6 each time. And if we use this multiplication with the face index, we're gonna get what we want. I'm gonna use the face index right here. So remember, this was 0 and the face with the index 0. If we multiply this by 0, we're gonna get 0, right? If we multiply this by 1, so with the face that is equal to 1, with the face that has an index of 1, this is just gonna be this. If it's 2, it's gonna be 2/6, and so on down the line. Now, this right here is gonna be the same thing, but we're gonna offset it by 1/6. So remember the very first face, so this is 0, and for the very first face, this is 1/6. For the next face, this is going to be 2/6, right? So for, let's say, face with the index of 1, this is going to be 1/6 and 1/6, right? So it's 2/6. So it's going to be 2/6. Now, if this is getting a bit overwhelming, don't worry. This just requires a bit of practice and running these numbers in the interactive Python console, or maybe even drawing this out on a piece of paper. You know, just saying that, okay, the coordinates for this is 1/6, and then so on, and just trying to understand how this all works. Okay, now let's go ahead and try and run this particular code. I'm gonna go ahead and select that face, run our script, and look at that. If you remember that the top face had an index of 5, and it got that last rounded square. Now, if we select another face and run our script, oh, that's exactly the face with the index of 0, and just go ahead and run all these. And now you can see that we have used bmesh loops to modify the UV coordinates on this particular mesh. Okay, and for our final example, we're going to be using bmesh loops to work with vertex colors. Now, I have a scene here with a icosphere that's subdivided 5 times, and I have this code right here already prepared for us. I'm at the top, I'm importing random. We're going to be generating a random value in the script. Again, importing UI and bmesh. I have a main function that contains our logic. Again, getting the active object, getting the bmesh, and right here we're starting to work with the vertex color data. And in particular, we're adding a new layer, and it's going to be called vert color. Getting a reference to that layer, similar to the previous example, we're just going to be looping over all the faces and working with faces that are selected. Now we're going to continue and loop over all the loops, and we're going to create a random red component. So we're going to be coloring this a shade of red, and I'm just going to use the uniform function and get a random value between 0.1 and 1, and I'll create an RGB value right here which has the random red component. Then we have green, which is set to 0, blue set to 0, and then alpha. And this particular color is going to go into the loop, and in particular the vertex color layer. And finally, we're going to go ahead and update our bmesh. And actually, I forgot to read the bmesh like that. Okay, let's go ahead and select our icosphere. And before I run the script, take a look at the mesh data, and in particular the color attributes. Okay, before I run this, I need to enter edit mode and then select some faces right here. And notice as I run our script, we're gonna get a new color attribute right down here. It's gonna be vert color, the one that we set in our script. And let's go ahead and run our script. And you can see that vert color here down here. And let's change the mode to vertex paint. And as soon as I change the mode, it creates a new attribute right here. And we need to select the one that we created with the script. And you can see that right here, these vertex colors were set with our script. Now you can see that the transitions on these vertex colors are pretty rough. For example, if we zoom in right here and take a look at, let's say this vert right here, it has different red values for each one of the sides and for each one of these faces. And to fix that and make sure that we have a uniform color for this particular face, for this particular vert, we need to somehow save the selection. So we need to create some kind of lookup table. When we first generate a color, we're going to save it. And if we ever get back to this particular vert, we're going to know based on the vert index, we're going to go ahead and just reuse the color we've already generated. I'm going to go ahead and update the script. I'm going to add a new dictionary. I'm going to go ahead and create a new dictionary, and I'm going to call it color lookup. And next, I'm going to update this code right here that generates our color component. And instead of generating a random color component each time we're looping over this for loop, I'm going to get the vert index under loop and vert. So this contains the vert index. And I'm going to write this if statement that's going to check if this vert index is not in our color lookup dictionary, then let's generate a random color value, or in particular the red component, random red component. And we're going to place that random red component into our color lookup dictionary using that particular index. So next time we're going to see this vert index, this is going to tell Python that we already have a color for this particular vertex. And now, instead of having this right here, I'm going to replace it with our color component. And now this should look a lot better. Let's go ahead and go into edit mode again. And I'm going to go ahead and select all the faces. And let me remove those two vertex color attributes. I'm going to rerun the script. We generated the vert color. Go back to vertex paint. Select that vertex color attribute we created. And let's take a closer look. And now you can see that particular color value, like for example, this color value, the red, is common amongst all the faces, right? And this is how the rest of the faces look. All right, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and learned something new. If you're still hungry for more Blender Python tutorials, check out this video right here where I deconstruct a Blender add-on. Thanks for watching.